Camping is something we all did as kids, or at least some of us did. Staying out in the dark with friends or family, sitting around the campfire, telling scary stories, eating roasted marshmallows. It was a really fun time as kids and teenagers. However, the story doesn't always go that way for some people. Welcome back to the Crime Lab channel. In today's video, we'll be looking at the story of the Wells Gray Park murders. While some people have fun during their camping trips, the story went a little bit differently for the victims of our story in today's video. Camping murders can be a very saddening story, and we will be looking at this case to prove that point. The Wells Gray Provincial Park is a well-known wilderness park in east-central British Columbia, Canada. The park protects most of the southern and highest regions of the Cariboo Mountains and covers 1.3 million acres. It is British Columbia's fourth largest park after Tutchinchini, Spotsylvania, and Tweedsmuir. It was a great place for families until a family of 6 lost their lives at the park. On August 2, 1982, 3 generations of a family set out on a 2-week camping trip in the Clearwater Valley near Wells Gray Provincial Park in British Columbia. They were Bob and Jackie Johnson, their 2 daughters, Janet, aged 13, and Karen, aged 11, as well as Jackie's parents, George and Edith Bentley. The Johnsons pitched their tents at a secluded area near the old Bear Creek prison site, and the Bentleys later arrived with their truck and camper van with a boat on top. The family last contacted relatives on August 6th when Edith called a second daughter, according to retired RCMP Sergeant Mike Eastham, who published a book about the incident and the investigation in 1999. On August 16th, Bob Johnson failed to return to work at Gorman Brothers Lumber in West Bank, which was considered very unusual for a 44-year-old employee. A week later, he was reported missing to the local police. This began a search that lasted 5 weeks from when the family were last heard from, and was centered on Wells Gray Park, where the family had planned to meet. On September 13, 1982, a mushroom picker reported finding a burned-out car with the driver's side door wide open in a clearing off a mountainside logging road.
The Johnson's family car burned in a blaze so intense that it melted the windows.
The logging road was near Battle Mountain Road, 13 miles from Bear Creek and north of the town of Clearwater. The wreckage was similar to the car that the Johnsons were driving. When the Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers searched the vehicle, they found burned bodies of the 4 missing adults who had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber weapon. In the trunk were the remains of the 2 girls. The charred remains were that of the Bentley and Johnson families, and based on the vehicle's location in an accessible area, it was quickly assumed that the local was responsible for the murders. During the spring of 1983, several innovative methods were used to try to solve the baffling murders. In April, the presumed crime was reenacted on site for TV cameras and aired across Canada in hopes that some specific clue would be triggered. In May, police drove a replica of the Bentley's 1981 Ford camper truck to Ontario and Quebec, as over 300 people had claimed they had seen such a vehicle heading east during the fall and winter. The reward for finding the truck was raised to $7,500, and 10,000 posters were sent out to police detachments and post offices across North America. The locals had seen the family camped at Bear Creek, and a search of the area by the RCMP officers resulted in 6 used .22 caliber ammunition shells being found. Some beer caps of the brand known to be drunk by Bob Johnson were also found, and full bottles were cooling in a nearby stream. 2 sticks with sharp ends, probably used by the 2 girls to roast marshmallows, were also at the site. Yet the Bentley's 1981 Ford truck and camper and their camping gear, boat and motor, and other possessions were still missing. A year after the families disappeared, the murderer had still not been caught.
A year now, exactly a year that you discovered those bodies in Wells Gray Provincial Park. Have we made any headway at all in the case?
We've investigated over 12,000 tips during the past 12 months, and As to whether or not we're any closer to solving it, well, we've certainly eliminated an awful lot of people.
Everybody has the same opinion that somewhere somebody knows something about this, and one day they're going to tell us, and when they do, we're going to solve this crime.
And the summer of 1983 became one of the worst for tourism in nearby Wells Gray Park. During the Canada Day holiday weekend, the weather was splendid, and the media advised tourists not to head to British Columbia's parks because all campgrounds were full. The exception was Wells Gray Park, where only 18 of 105 sites were occupied. But then on October 18, 1983, 14 months after the murders, the Bentley's camper truck was finally found by two forestry workers near Bear Creek on an old logging road near Trophy Mountain. The spot was 15 miles from the murder site and 20 miles from where the Johnsons' car was located. It had been burned using an accelerant, probably gasoline mixed with something else. The truck was well hidden, and it appeared that there had been an attempt to drive the truck into the gorge, but logs had blocked its path. The burnt remnants provided no clues for the RCMP officers, but the location was of interest. The abandoned logging road on Trophy Mountain was not easy to access. The location reconfirmed a local was most likely involved, as outsiders would have been unlikely to find the isolated spot. The RCMP officers started questioning possible suspects again in Clearwater. They went door to door in the small community and questioned everyone in town a second time. 24-year-old David William Shearing, who lived locally, was asked about how to re-register a Ford pickup and repair a hole in its door. David lived 3 miles from the site of the murders, and the RCMP officers had never released the information about the bullet hole. On November 19, 1983, the RCMP officers found David in Tumbler Ridge, north of Kamloops, where he was due to appear in court in a few days on a possession of stolen property charge of a significant number of tools. He was taken into custody for questioning. RCMP Detective Sergeant Mike Astham and Constable Ken Leibel were convinced David Shearing was guilty from the beginning and tried to get his confidence. In the end, they got him to confess to the crimes by getting him to relax and defer appointing a lawyer. Initially, he was led to believe the arrest was related to a hit-and-run incident, which he quickly confessed to before the detectives confronted him with the Bennett Johnson case. David accidentally admitted to Sergeant Astham that he had heard the murders were committed at Bear Creek, which was part of the information released to the public. After effort and persuasion, Sergeant Astham managed to convince David to confess to the 6 murders, and he eventually agreed to reenact the murders and even to turn over the murdered family possessions. He also handed the police a .22 caliber Remington pump-action rifle, which was forensically matched as the murder weapon. Coincidentally, David Shearing was one of the first individuals to have been interviewed by RCMP after the investigation started when the bodies were discovered. The interview took place in the backyard of the Shearing family farmhouse. At the time of the interview, the murder weapon, David's .22 caliber rifle, hung on the wall of the family home. When the police were questioned why they didn't seize the firearm and tested to see if casing fired from it matches those found at the scene, Inspector Vic Edwards mentioned basic rights, saying, "I don't have any rights to go into your house and examine your guns. The same as I didn't have any right to go into Mr. Shearing's house. We had no reason to suspect him." On April 16, 1984, David Shearing pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder. In his 10-minute summation, Supreme Court Justice Harry McKay described the crime as a cold-blooded and senseless execution of 6 defenseless and innocent people, a slaughter that devastated 3 generations in a single bound. What a tragedy, what a waste, and for what? He sentenced David to life in prison without parole eligibility for 25 years. This was the maximum possible penalty for second-degree murder, and the first time in Canadian history that it had been handed out. Only after his sentencing was his crime's true nature revealed. When questioned by Sergeant Astham after the sentencing, he said that on August 10th, he had stalked the victims at their campsite and shot the adults with a .22 caliber Remington Model 5.72 pump-action rifle. This allowed him to kidnap the girls who were kept alive for a week, raping Janet, and then killing them with a shot to the back of the head. In September 2008, David Shearing was up for parole, but the National Parole Board ruled that he still had violent sexual fantasies, had not completed sex offender treatment, and was not ready for freedom. His other 3 appeals were rejected as well. Thank you for watching this video. Hit us up in the comment section and give us a thumbs up if you liked the video. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more.